I conduct research on issues at the conjunction of war, peace, philosophy, and religion. Many people worry that they're being viewed negatively by others. So if you're a Christian, you fear that you're being viewed negatively by Muslims. If you're a Muslim, you fear that you're being viewed negatively by Christians. The question is, can prejudice and ignorance about the beliefs and practices of the religious other lead to social tensions? I mean, I think it's very clear that they can. The problem is that sometimes we're terribly mistaken about other people's intentions. Sometimes we can misidentify them. And so we end up using force, we end up, using harsh words. We end up acting aggressively out of fear when we've just mistaken about what the other person intended. When we fear another and we start reading intentions into the other, that really sets us up for a bad dynamic. And unfortunately tends to produce what we fear. Right? Because when one gets into dynamics of fear, eliciting, the reaction of self-defense, it becomes what's called the security dilemma, where each person fearing something similar from the other tries to preempt it before the other does, and each tries to preempt. And so one ends up engaging in conflict. And again, it need not be armed conflict. It can be other lesser forms of conflict. Needlessly, prejudice and ignorance usually functions most effectively to exacerbate conflict when there is little existential contact between the individual and the would-be adversary, or the person who's thought to be the negative other. Over the course of history, we have many examples of how these sorts of negative imaging can occur. I mean, the negative imaging about Jews and Christian communities. Lots of examples of this sort of thing, and how, again, it can make conflicts worse. One way that it makes conflict worse is that it dehumanizes the other. We have to beware of all the negative messaging, that the negative messaging in a way cuts counter to our instinctive reaction, this sort of natural openness that we have.